way. I'm on the way. I'm on the way. I'm on the way. Tell her I'm on the way. Tell her I'm on the way. Wait, no.
Spring means outdoor activities, and in Oklahoma, it means a threat of storms, sometimes deadly storms. VIBELAND Media, along with the Vible and VIBELAND Sports, is proud to present this crossover bonus podcast featuring one of our state's most recognizable forecasters and storm chasers in Michael Armstrong of KOCO Channel 5 in Oklahoma City. On this show, we discuss his humble beginnings in meteorology, his first month, a stormy month on the job in 1999, plus an outlook on this spring's severe weather season and how you should prepare ahead of the storm. Enjoy this special presentation from VIBELAND Media. And we welcome into this bonus crossover podcast, KOCO 5 meteorologist Michael Armstrong. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. You have to be enjoying a little bit of a break from what has been a long winter weather season for you.
Right, Todd. Yeah, winter weather is actually probably my least favorite thing to cover just because the roads get messy, or maybe they don't, depending on what actually falls from the sky. And then does it actually freeze on contact and all of that nonsense? We all understand, how we don't just get snow in Oklahoma. A lot of times we end up with either sleet or freezing rain and all of that, and just the mess that goes with it. And, I know people want to see snow. We hear about it every time. Can you guys just send us some snow already? But unfortunately, where we live, a lot of times it's just not that simple. It's not rain or snow. It's a lot of ice that goes with it.
And I'm going to give you a chance to defend yourself, because I've defended weatherman for quite a while on Twitter about winter weather. Everybody says, well, they blew this one again. People don't understand that a degree here or there can completely change a forecast.
Well, and, I'm always I understand people's frustration with it. I really do, because we may be saying one thing and something else happens, and that's tough, because you're trying to make plans, you're trying to do things. I mean, businesses are trying to make decisions. So I get it. I mean, it's a complicated thing. So I'm sensitive to that. The first thing I do is I don't come out swinging and just want to go on defense mode and put up a wall initially. I want to listen to people and hear what they have to say. There's sometimes whenever somebody has a criticism, and you'd actually be a lot better off if you listen to them. There might be some value in what they're saying. So that's number one. But number two is we do work really hard to try to get it right. I mean, no meteorologist is ever out to miss it. We're all working really hard to get it right. And the reality is that no matter what part of the country you forecasted in, and I've talked to a guy who actually works at the National Weather Service, and he's worked at all different Weather Service offices all over the country. Whereas I'm in Oklahoma and I'm from here. This is where I've been my whole life. He's experienced winter weather and forecasting all over the country. And he said here it's as hard, if not harder, than any other place he's ever been. So that's coming from an outside perspective, which to me was pretty interesting. It just kind of underscores the challenge that we do face in dealing with winter weather. One of the big issues is that it's not just a couple of degrees at the surface like you were talking about. It's what's happening 5,000 feet above our heads or 7,000 feet above our heads. And we get 2, maybe on occasion, 3 balloon launches per day to actually measure the air that's up above us. So when that's all you get one at 6 a.m. and one at 6 p.m. You get those balloon launches that the National Weather Service does. That's your data source. So a lot of things, I mean, we joke about it, but like, you don't like the weather in Oklahoma, wait 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you think about that, you're going 12 hours in between balloon launches. And so I'm not going to say it's complete guesswork, because we do have a lot of computer models and we have some other things that help us along the way. But the best way is to actually take a measurement and find out what that air actually is like.
Channel 5 meteorologist Michael Armstrong is our guest on this severe weather bonus crossover podcast from VIBELAND Sports and the Vible. Michael, one other question, then I want to talk about your beginning days in Ponca City. Is it much, much, much more difficult to predict winter weather than it is severe weather?
It is, and the main reason why is you're not as concerned of the precipitation type. So with winter weather, you're trying to figure out, okay, is it going to be snow? Is it going to change over? Is it going to go to sleet, freezing rain, grapple? Are we just going to have rain? And then after it falls, is the ground cold enough? Are the bridges cold enough? What's going to happen to whatever falls once it actually reaches the ground? And then you're dealing with amounts. When you're dealing with severe weather, you're just trying to assess whether what we call the cap, whether the cap's going to break and storms are actually going to develop. And then are they going to be supercell storms, for instance, that rotate and are more capable of producing tornadoes, more likely to produce tornadoes? Or are you going to be dealing with the squall line and damaging winds and hail? But so winter weather is a lot more complicated than severe weather forecasting, for sure.
Okay, you grew up in Ponca City. At what point did you decide, hey, I want to pursue a career in meteorology?
Interesting story on that, and I won't go into this too long, but I'll just say this: a very significant event happened when I was in college. Actually, I went to the University of Arkansas for a few years. I actually played trumpet through high school as a drum major and all that, and was really thinking that was the direction I was going to go. And this was in 1996. A tornado at night came through eastern Oklahoma and hit Van Buren, Arkansas, and I was in Fayetteville at the time. And I remember hearing about people being killed in Van Buren, and it was that report of there was no warning, except this time it was legit. Like when people were saying there wasn't any warning, they really didn't have any. It hit under the cover of darkness, and I can't tell you why, Todd. Sometimes we don't know what's going to impact our life and what direction we go. I had always grown up enjoying storms, actually, in a weird way. I like watching the clouds. I would go outside, like a typical Oklahoman when the
Right.
Sirens go off or whatever. I wanted to see the clouds, and it just captivated me. But that event changed it for me, because I thought, how in the world, with all the radar, with all the technology and everything else, can we have a tornado hit somewhere with no warning and people lose their life? And that's something that I can get behind. That's something that I can do something about. And I'm going to devote myself to that. And here I am.
Well, and I think meteorology fits you, and I'll tell you why. Because you are a man of God, and you love serving people and helping people. You could almost use your ministry interest in meteorology to help in the face of tough times with people.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. I've kind of joked about it before, but of course my name's Mike, and then first I was into music, and then was in meteorology, and then vocationally actually was a pastor, so I went into ministry for a while. So I've got this thing with M's. I can't really describe why that is, but it's just the way it is. But, it really does fuel me. My love for just people in general, which comes out of my love from God, but my love for people, of course, those are the two greatest commandments. So it's so interesting, actually, to have gone into ministry. I thought that's probably what I would do for the rest of my life after I left the meteorology as a vocation. But man, I had so much growing up to do, because what I didn't realize really at that time was that I had really spent a great deal of my life not understanding that God had me exactly where He wanted me in meteorology, but I was to minister there. You don't have to be a pastor to minister. You just need to care about people and love people. That's the bottom line. And so I get to do that and get to do what I love in meteorology. So it was a very interesting transition for me. I learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about the Lord going through that time and through those steps.
You've been very, very fortunate. In my opinion, you worked with the best meteorologist that's ever been, and that's Gary England. How special was that, your relationship with him?
Well, it's still special, and it was very special. And here's why. Whenever I came into the business as a young budding meteorologist, you need somebody to believe in you. Everybody needs someone to believe in them, in their, especially when you're getting started in your career, man, just to have somebody that's going to encourage you, tell you things that you're not doing right, to help you learn from their experiences. And Gary was as a mentor as much as he was a boss for me. And I can't say thank you enough to him because of all the life lessons he taught me. He taught me about meteorology. He taught me about Oklahoma weather. He taught me about what they care about, and and in some cases what they don't really need to know. Like, hey, Mike, you don't really even need to share all that. You can keep that a lot more concise or whatever. So I learned a lot of things from him, and we continue to be friends to this day. And I love his passion for weather and his passion for wanting to keep Oklahoma safe, which he did so well at for so long. And he really blazed a trail. It's one thing to do things that somebody else has already done. It's another thing to come up with something new and different and do it a different way that really impacts an entire industry. And that's Gary, and that's why he's in the Oklahoma Hall of Fame.
Gary leaves. You don't get the chief meteorologist job at Channel 9. Then you go back into ministry. I guess that was kind of God's way of maybe directing your life. It all happened about the same time, didn't it?
It did, yeah. And again, I give a lot of credit to him for his believing in me. And that was a difficult transition for sure. And I wasn't really sure what to expect. The broadcast business is an interesting one. There's uncertainty like there is, I guess, in every industry, but you're just, I don't know why, especially when you're younger, you always feel like you're kind of looking over your shoulder like, man, are they going to get rid of me or whatever if I'm not, producing or whatever, that type of thing. So you kind of deal with that insecurity a little bit. I don't know how much that necessarily played into it as much as just what you said. It was just me really getting on my knees, just seeking the Lord. Where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? I want to live my life for you more than anything else. And me, I don't have a clue right now, Lord. So you're going to have to really, I'm a little bit thick, I guess I'm a little stubborn, and not all that smart sometimes either. So, I just said, I just need you to show me. So it took several months, and it was a tough time where I had actually sent out, resumes and that kind of stuff all over the country, thinking that, meteorology was where I needed to be. And he just had a different plan.
So you get back into meteorology, and you've got a really, really good gig right now with Channel 5. You're kind of what I think they would call a field meteorologist, and the vehicle and the equipment that they've given you is first class. I mean, how did that all come down and shake out for you?
Yeah, so it was a dream job. So I was actually in ministry there at Henderson Hills in Edmond, and got a call, and they were interested in just having me do some storm chasing, just, and I said, well, obviously I've got a lot of responsibilities in my work and in my family and those sorts of things. So I had some boundaries that I drew lines around, but we were able to work out a deal between the leadership at the church and leadership here at Channel 5, where, I began chasing, and that was in May of 2015. And then later that year in August, they had come up with a new idea, and that was to, rather than just having just a group of storm chasers, to actually hire on kind of a team leader who was the field meteorologist, and to purchase Storm Command and have someone who could actually make Storm Command sing, so to speak, go out and be able to do presentations, do weather live on the air from the back TV monitor, do more than just show a streaming video shot from a camera, somebody who actually has the training and the meteorology background to be able to do that. And then I have another component of my job, which most people don't see, and that's behind the scenes doing a lot of different things. I wear a lot of different hats, and I get to fill in on the air whenever people are going on vacation or sick or something like that too. And I've got that skill set. So it's just a perfect fit for me. And I recognized that right away when they presented that vision to me. And I was like, wow, this is my dream job. And most people would think, oh, you climb the ladder and you go to the chief meteorologist position. That's what everybody's aiming for. But I just, very honestly, that wasn't it for me. Like, this is the position that I would have, jumped at forever. And when God introduced that into my life and said, here's this opportunity, I'm sitting here going, now, wait a minute, we were going to do this ministry thing, Lord, what's going on here? But it's just, and actually it was kind of an interesting thing, because over about a 4-month stretch, I was considering the position, and then initially actually said no to the job even after all that time, and I knew for the next week that I made the wrong decision. And it was the craziest thing, but I hadn't really, it sounds weird, but I mean, I was talking to my wife all through that time, but she independently of me knew in her heart that I had made the wrong decision as well, that we had made the wrong decision, but we hadn't really talked about it. And so like a week later, we're sitting here and we both come to the realization that, wow, okay, we're going to have to reach back out to KOCO and talk to them because, and they're going to be really confused, you know, and we worked through all that, but it was a really, it was a challenging time because again, I was in that position where I was just seeking and wanting leadership and knowing which direction to go. And, you know, like I said, here I am though. And it was all those things. It was confusing. Like, is this guy in or is he out? What's the deal? You know? So it was very interesting to work through behind the scenes for sure.
I absolutely don't know Michael, your boss, the chief meteorologist at Channel 5, Damon Lane, but I think it says a lot about him because let's be honest, I'm in broadcasting, you're in broadcasting, a lot of egos are involved all the time, a lot of insecurity. This guy brings in a veteran meteorologist almost to be kind of like a co-chief with him. Isn't that right?
Well, in some case, I mean, he's definitely the chief. So, I mean, he's my boss. So, you know, I'm going to present ideas to him and he'll make the decision on them along with the rest of our management team and everything else. But not just me, you know, Jonathan has been a chief meteorologist himself in Fort Wayne, Indiana, a very accomplished meteorologist, worked at Channel 4 for a while now. And so we've really formed up a team, and that doesn't happen if you don't have, I'm going to say it, just some humility. I mean, it takes humility because, like I was talking about before, a lot of times people do want to move forward in their career and move into that next position, whatever that is, whether it's a morning position or, you know, weekday evening where you're the chief meteorologist type of position. So especially if you've already experienced that and you've been in a leadership role, to then step back and humble yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to be more of a role player, but I've got an important role to play on this team. And that's how we look at it. We really do operate as a team. When it comes to weather, we're talking to each other about things that we're seeing in the science, things that we're seeing, you know, develop. And we hope that because we're doing it together, it improves our forecasts, it makes them more accurate, and people can depend on us.
Do you feel like there's too much over-sensationalism in TV meteorology?
You know, there may be by individuals at times, but I'll say this. There's a wide audience out there, okay? So some people respond better to, I would say, a louder message, while other people don't need that. They hear a warning and they put their plan into place and they go do their thing. I mean, they know exactly what they're going to do. And the weather is dramatic enough for them. They don't need to have extra drama created. So when I answer that question, I always answer it in the sense of there is a beauty about diversity, no matter kind of where you're at in life. And I think weather is a perfect place to actually visually see that. So there's a diversity in the messaging. There's a diversity in how you get your message, how you get your warnings. There's all of that messaging is important, and the method that gets used can vary. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because some people need a different way of communication in order to understand what's at risk and to take action.
Michael Armstrong, field meteorologist for Channel 5 KOCO here in Oklahoma City, is our guest on this bonus crossover podcast. We're going to get to a severe weather forecast. I want to go through severe weather safety precautions, because I know there's a lot of people that are new to the area a little bit later on the show, but a couple of other things I want to talk to you about. You start in April, I believe, was it of 99 at Channel 9, and that's less than a full month before one of the most violent storms on the face of the earth ever hit anywhere, and that was the May 3rd tornado.
Oh, Todd, I see you bringing your sports research into this. I love it. You are so well prepared, my man. You hit the nail on the head. So that's a very interesting thing. So I was I was at OU. I was finishing up my meteorology degree, and I was chasing with a gentleman named Dan Scoff, who's a chief meteorologist in Fayetteville, Arkansas now, of all places, where I first started going to college. So it's so weird how all this works. But anyway, Dan and I were chasing, and we, in January of that year of 1999, went to Little Rock. We went into Arkansas for a very a big event, a high-risk type of day where the stakes were very high, and there were a number of tornadoes. And it was kind of crazy, really, in many ways. I mean, we're college students. We've been storm chasing for a while, so it's not really new to us. But to go into areas with hills and trees and try to track tornadoes is really, really difficult because of the terrain. You just don't get very many opportunities to actually see the storm in between all the trees and everything, so many pine trees and everything else. So we actually found a hilltop that we were setting on next to a library and kind of a school. And we were actually just in Little Rock just watching these supercells just train one after another over town. And we actually never really could see a tornado develop. But later that evening, after dark, the governor's mansion got hit. So we drove back, and the next day we took our video to Gary and said, "Hey, Gary, we shot this video if you're interested." And it was real dramatic. It had the tornado sirens blaring and all that, and you could see the storm. You just couldn't see a tornado underneath it. But again, the visibility is not that great. So we brought that video back, and he said, "Well, hey, you guys want to be storm trackers?" And literally hired us right there on the spot, pretty much. I mean, it was just amazing, really, the whole way the whole thing went. And that was kind of the beginning of my career. And then April 2nd, 1999, that was my first chase day with the station at that time. And we saw a big tornado out in western Oklahoma. Fortunately, it was like a lot of tornadoes. It was out in the middle of nowhere and didn't do very much. And even though it was a big one, it wasn't on the ground for a long track, and it didn't hit, homes and all that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the ramp up. And we had no idea what was coming, but May 3rd, 1999 was just a game changer for the state of Oklahoma. I mean, that was it. I mean, seeing that tornado, barreling through the Chickasha area, and then we actually ended up getting blocked by damage. We actually ended up seeing about 20 different tornadoes that day on 4 different storms. But we were listening to the broadcast over our phone and hearing what the Moore tornado had done, and just knowing that history was being made. And welcome to meteorology, Mr. Armstrong. I mean, it was truly, I just look back on it and I still shake my head. I just can't even believe the ferocity, the intensity of that event. The closest we've seen to an atmosphere like that was May 24, 2011, another tornado outbreak here in Oklahoma. Those are the type of days that we prepare for. Those, a sports analogy is kind of like if you're a football player, it's preparing for the Super Bowl. That's like kind of what that is for us. And we aim everything toward being ready for those days. It's the little days, we're always there because we're wanting to build trust. Certainly, we want people to understand we're going to be there no matter what's going on. But those are the days we watch out for, and that was my introduction into meteorology. It was crazy.
Michael, was that just overwhelming? Because I'm sitting here getting chills as you're telling that story, and I remember watching on TV that storm going through the Oklahoma City metro area and thinking, my God, how many hundreds of people are losing their lives right now? Was that just overwhelming? I think it would be for a veteran meteorologist, but somebody just right out of college.
It is. In every way you just described it, it was overwhelming. And I will tell you, when you're out there and you're chasing the storms, you have to be so dialed in and focused that you really don't appreciate the immensity, the scope of the event when it's unfolding, because you have so many things that you have to do to be in position when you're out there chasing, or if you're in the studio, you're trying to make sure that your people are in the right places, that your technology is working, the radar data is right. You're analyzing things quickly and effectively and getting the warnings on each individual storm. On that day, there were 4 different storms with tornadoes on the ground at the same time. I mean, and everybody's wanting you to cover their storm like it's the only one, and you can't do that. So it's very, very, I don't know, as a young man, as a young meteorologist involved in that, I didn't have a clue, really, honestly, Todd, at that time of just how significant it was. And honestly, it was kind of a protection, I think, to some degree, because if you did understand the scope of it, I don't know what a person does at that point. I almost think of it as kind of like wartime or in a triage or something like that, where maybe a doctor's working on someone and they're just doing their job, like they're trying to save someone's life, and they've got to stay focused. Like you can't break down at that point, and you got to be calm, and you got to be level-headed, and you got to be in that moment. Later on, you can reflect on it, kind of learn from it, and see what maybe you did that you might have done differently. And of course, we all kind of Monday morning quarterback ourselves and everything, and how could we have done this better or that better? But when you're in the middle of it, your preparation for that event is so vital, because it really is. I have a good buddy who's a police officer, and of course they prepare and they train and they train and they train, constantly being ready for that mass shooter type of incident or something like that. I mean, they're always on guard. That's their job. And in a way, that's kind of how I approach my work too. When it's quiet like this and we got a sunny day out, you know what I'll be doing? I'll probably be reading and studying and figuring out better ways to do things, and how can we be ready for the next event.
I remember that day just like it happened about a year ago. It was surreal, Michael. It was almost like a Hollywood movie, how many tornadoes were dropping out of the sky from the start of the early afternoon hours until late at night. I mean, if one person dies in a tornadic storm, that's one too many. But are you surprised, looking back, that more lives were not lost and even more property damage to how severe that day actually was?
Yes. And one thing I do want to mention about that is that we sometimes get too caught up with the fatality numbers. And I'm very sensitive to the actual stories of people and how their lives are changed. For us, let's say, it really is, there's kind of a spectator part of this, in a sense of like, well, it's happening to somebody else. But if it's happening to your family member and it gets personal, man, and the thing I say about that is, it's the injuries, the number of terrible injuries, life-changing injuries. These people, like, sometimes your quality of life is diminished dramatically. You may never walk again, for instance, or if you have some sort of brain injury, those people never even make it into the fatality count. And yet, I would say that their quality of life is just as important, And so that's just a point I want to raise on that, because that's why we talk so much about precautions. Sure, you can, the numbers are in your favor that if you shelter in place, you're going to survive the tornado on most tornadoes. The bigger ones that completely destroy a home and wipe it from its foundation, obviously your odds of surviving do go down dramatically in those more intense tornadoes. But still, there's a lot of precautions that you take that we still recommend that you still do those things, because putting yourself out in the storm where you don't know what traffic's like, you could be run over by the tornado in a car. That's a terrible situation to be in.
There were so many people that day that were hiding under overpasses. I mean, we learned a lot that day from how dangerous it is to be out in a vehicle and stranded, as you mentioned, in traffic with severe weather.
Right, and that's the part where it's tricky, honestly, because if someone's plan is to flee their home, if a tornado's coming at it, you better know your roads, and you better know what the traffic conditions are like before you ever step foot out that door, because you could be putting yourself into a worse position. That's the reality. And that happened on May 31st, 2013 with the El Reno tornado, where we had a dual threat in flash flooding, which actually killed almost or the same amount of people as the tornadoes did that day. And so people were out driving. There was traffic jams. They were getting stuck in the water with a very intense storm rolling over you. I mean, it is a nightmare scenario. So there's a lot of awareness that that's why I talk so much about being prepared, Todd. I'm just so passionate about trying to prepare kids, trying to teach them, trying to prepare adults as well. And I get it. I mean, you go through a lot of your life and it's like, well, that's never going to happen to me. And for most people, that's a true statement. But if it ever does, you will want to be prepared, because all you got to do is ask someone who's survived it and been through it. And trust me, they're prepared for the next time. They don't wait to prepare anymore. They're ready.
Michael Armstrong of Channel 5 in Oklahoma City, KOCO TV, is our guest here on this bonus crossover podcast from the Vible and VIBELAND Sports. Michael, what was it about the atmosphere that day, and what have we learned about the conditions that led to such a massive outbreak and loss of life and property damage?
Well, there's two primary things that we look at, and I won't go too deep into the meteorology, but there's the energy that's in the atmosphere. So there's a thing that we call CAPE. It's convective available potential energy. It's a big scientific word. We're meteorologists, but that's one of the things that we look at. Does the atmosphere have the ability to produce very, very intense updrafts where the wind is going straight up in these clouds at 100 miles per hour or more? So does that exist? And then two, do we have wind shear, which means the wind is changing in direction and in speed the higher you go up in the atmosphere. So you have wind shear and you have CAPE or energy. That's a combination that you have to watch out for. That particular day, in my opinion, it was kind of a perfect balance of both. You had a lot of CAPE, and it was very the way that plays out is this is what you hear people say. Man, it just feels so sticky outside. It just feels like a tornado day. Have you ever heard anybody say that?
Oh, yes. I've said it.
So that's what we're talking about. That's that Gulf moisture that comes up from the Gulf of Mexico through Texas into Oklahoma, and then we get cold air up above it. So that's why the springtime is so volatile, because we're still dealing in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere. The cold air is still coming out from the mountains, and it moves over top of that warm, moist air that's down near the ground, and that's like a powder keg. The atmosphere does not like that. That's called instability. So it wants to change that, and the way it does it is through thunderstorms. So we look for those ingredients. And that day, the particularly, Todd, I've looked at this really in detail because, it's funny that you mentioned that I want to look at those days and go, what was it? Because we see other days where there's severe storms and the potential, and it doesn't I say work out. We don't end up with a tornado outbreak, And so what was it about that day? Looking back at all the data, the low level wind shear that day, there was a dramatic increase as you moved into 4 and 5 o'clock in the evening, where the winds just above the surface started really ramping up. And so that creates a lot of turning in the low levels of the atmosphere. And then when a storm comes along, it basically takes like a horizontal tube of air that's rotating and tilts it into the vertical and stretches it. And that's what creates those tornadoes. And it was just so, it still amazes me to this day, the efficiency of those storms, because it felt like every single one of them was producing a tornado, and that's pretty much what happened. And not only that, but big tornadoes. And it was just so it's kind of the measuring stick. We always look back at that. Like I said, I had no idea when I was out there chasing on it, the scope of what was happening, that I would be looking back at this event 20 years later and still learning things from it.
There's so many misconceptions about tornadoes, that they don't cross rivers. They don't go over mountainous terrain. I live near a river. I'm going to be safe. That's all a bunch of bunk, isn't it? A tornado can hit anytime, anywhere, any day of the year. But are you surprised that Moore has gone through what they've gone through twice, almost in the exact same area?
Right. And really, if you look at Moore, it's been even, you had May 8, 2003, which was an F4 that moved through there at that time. They hit the GM plant. So there's actually even another event that was October 4th, 1998, where they had a nighttime tornado right there along 4th Street and I-35 and more. That they took some damage then. So yes, to answer your question, you sit there and you go, man, is there anything scientific about this? What is the deal? Because people want to know what's going on and more. Like, what is it about this?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what we've seen is that urban sprawl, as we continue to expand the Oklahoma City metro area, and you see it all the time with new subdivisions going on further and further out. And one of the things that happens is that the metro, it's becoming more and more difficult for a tornado to move through our area without hitting something.
Yeah.
20, 30 years ago, even the May 3rd, 1999 track, Todd, I went back and looked at this in detail. It was actually not in a densely populated area really until after it crossed May and got over closer to Penn along Southwest 149 and Southwest 134th. And even that, there was like farms, and you saw horses in the video, of the tornado and everything else. And then when it finally, moved into more after it got closer to Janeway and Santa Fe and those areas and moved on across I-35 and then went up into Midwest City and Dell City, that's when it really got in the populated area. So a lot of its track, while it was at that EF4, EF5 intensity, it was actually in an area where it wasn't densely populated. If it hit those same areas now, a lot more people would be impacted.
Right.
So just population growth is one of those factors that comes into play on this. There is a part of me that is surprised that more people didn't die, that it is surprising that more has been hit the number of times that it is. I've talked to many people down in Norman, Harold Brooks for one of them, who works at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, who's one of the foremost climatologists on tornadoes in the world. And, and you ask these people point blank, hey, what's the deal? And they're like, there's nothing scientifically that we can prove of why more has been hit. I mean, what do you say? Is it just bad luck? Unfortunately, in a way, that's my opinion. I really think it has been very, very unlucky in that way. The thing about it is that other parts of the state, other parts of the country have experienced violent tornadoes also. They just haven't got the attention because it hasn't happened in those areas over and over and over again. But it really can happen anywhere at any time. And you're right, there are a lot of myths. We need to teach. We need to teach people that optimism is not a plan. You don't want to have a false sense of security when it comes to tornadoes. You just don't. It's not, and I understand, you want to think that this terrible thing is never going to happen to me, but that's not a good plan.
There are so many things I'd like to just continue to talk about, but there's a couple of other questions that I want to get into the main reason why we had you here, the outlook and precautions for newcomers here to the Oklahoma City area. To me, Michael, and it's one of my favorite movies. It probably drives meteorologists crazy, but Twister. I think Twister has really, and I'm very serious about this, created a real problem for people like you and professional storm chasers, because it gave the sense to everybody that you can go out and track severe weather. And you have a bunch of novices that don't know the road, they don't know how storms travel, that are out trying to be faux weathermen. Is that not a concern to you that professionals like yourself could be in jeopardy because of these guys and these girls and these women and men that go out and think that they can chase storms?
Sure, it's definitely a concern, and I want to go home at the end of my shift just like anybody else does from their job. I mean, I've got a life outside of meteorology as well. I've got 4 children. I want my wife. I want to grow old with my wife. I want to experience life too. And so, from a safety factor, yes. As a matter of fact, when people ask me, "Are you, what's the scariest storm you've ever been on, or what's the most dangerous situation?" And I won't say that those things don't exist too, but I'm always far more concerned about the other person out there driving, because I don't know that there is a more distracted driver than a storm chaser who's not paying attention to the road. Because if you looked inside of a storm chase vehicle, Todd, and you may have before, there's gadgets everywhere. You may have a laptop, you've got 1 or 2 tablets, you've got your phone, you're looking at the clouds, you're your attention is focused everywhere except the road. So that's why I always encourage people that if they're going to chase, make sure and do it with somebody who knows what they're doing, who is does approach it with their number one priority being safety, and do it together. Don't go at it alone. Here's the thing. I totally understand your question and where you're coming from. There is another side to this, and I want to say this, that we live in a free country, and I am so thankful for that. And I'm thankful that we can go out and we can drive. We do need to do that sensibly, though. And so I don't know what the answer is, honestly. It comes down to personal responsibility and people being willing to say, you know what, I'd love to see that storm, but if I'm going to do that, I'm going to go maybe pay somebody who knows what they're doing to go do that with them, who's kind of who is a professional, because we do get it's troublesome. I mean, there are times whenever we're on a 2-lane road and you have people who have their tripods out and they're in the middle of the road and you can't even hardly get around them. You got other people who are driving at 100 miles an hour because they don't think they're in the right spot to get the best YouTube video to turn their profit on whatever. There's so many different scenarios. I can't even get into all of them because I don't know that I would be able to be comprehensive if I tried to list all of the different ways that and reasons people are out there chasing. I'm glad that we can pursue hobbies and we can do things because we do live in a free country. But at the same time, I think there is another side to that coin, and that's that you're doing me a favor if you don't know what you're doing by staying home because it is my job. I do have to be out there, and people are relying on me and our other members of our chase team. The work that we're doing is to pass along life-saving information. Now, are we physically, doing CPR on someone in those moments? No, but we're passing along information to equip people to make good decisions that will protect them and their families. And that's a lot different than it is to go out and say, I got a great picture of a tornado. You should go check out my Facebook page. That's not two totally different types of approaches there.
I just think people that do it don't have a clue, because I see these county roads during outbreak days that look like the Broadway extension in rush hour. I mean, there's just too many people out there, and people are going to get caught up in a storm. I mean, it even happened to some professional storm chasers from Colorado in that El Reno tornado in 2013 when the storm just took its own had its own mind and turned and went a different way and surprised them.
Right. And that day on that El Reno tornado, we're really lucky that we didn't lose a lot more chasers that day. There were a number of people who had damaged their vehicles that managed to survive that you never heard about because of Tim Samaras and Carl Young and that situation where they were killed, the researchers. But there were a number of people killed. There was actually a person who was out, who was what we would call a looky-loo, or somebody who really didn't know what they were doing, and they did get killed in the tornado. They were out in their pickup truck, and they got killed by the tornado. So it's not, I think sometimes people think, oh, you're just saying that. No, it really did happen. Like somebody went out and thought that they were going to, get an adrenaline rush, or I don't know what, again, you can make assumptions all day long, but if you're not with that person, you don't know the circumstances. That's not really fair to do. But the bottom line is, the person was not trained in storm chasing. That was clear from the evidence afterwards, and they ended up being killed in the tornado. So you're taking your life, and you're taking your life, and it's a risky thing. It's not something to play around with in that sense. And you're right. The movies and all of that definitely got, Twister got all that kind of that craze started, I think, in some ways, because it did show the, Bill Paxton character, and then Philip Seymour Hoffman. I think there's all these different characters, and of course they bring so much to it. I love the film. I think
I do too. It's
really entertaining, but the reality is when you go out there, there's a lot of boring driving under blue skies, waiting on storms to form type of stuff. And you don't end up on a tornado every storm chase, not by any stretch. And here they are, at every turn, at every corner, there's another, there's sisters, or there's an EF4, or there's a multi-vortex or whatever. And it's like, yeah, it ain't like that. But
it was April 19, anyway. Or it was May 3rd, 1999 in Hollywood is what Twister is.
Yeah.
Michael Armstrong is our guest on this bonus crossover podcast from the Vibe and VIBELAND Sports. One more question, then we're going to get to some other stuff. Has Tornado Alley shifted in the traditional sense over the last several years?
Tornado Alley is still Tornado Alley. So what will happen is, on any given year, there might be some areas that get more frequently hit because of a weather pattern kind of sets up, and you get multiple days where severe weather occurs in one particular area. So what comes to my mind is, for instance, in Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, that's an area that we call Dixie Alley, a Dixie Tornado Alley. So it's a secondary maximum that we can see clearly in the data when you go back and analyze, okay, you take a given year, you take 30 years, where did all the tornadoes happen? Where did the strongest tornadoes happen? That's a maximum. And we're still in a maximum in Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas and Nebraska as well, and in the plains of the United States. So I think there's too much made of that. I see the headlines too. I see some of the stories come out, and you have to really understand the details. We're in a very Twitter age now where a lot of the stuff is just very headliney, and you see like one summary, one little one-word sentence or whatever. And man, I'll tell you, in meteorology, it's very difficult to come up with any type of true something that that can be boiled down to one sentence. There's so many nuances and details, and just about for every rule I can give you in my field, there's an exception, and those exceptions are usually the outliers that you're like watching out for. Those are the big days, right? So I'm always careful about that when it comes to like one blanket statement about that. But when it comes to Tornado Alley, what people need to understand is, even though we might see a shift on any given year where one particular area may end up with more tornadoes than, let's say, Oklahoma does. Let's say Missouri gets a big year and there's a lot of tornadoes there. Does that mean Tornado Alley shifted? No, it doesn't. It just means that there's some natural variability. There's some variation in any given year on where the storms form and where the tornadoes form. But we're still in a very favorable area. There's nothing that's changed. The Rocky Mountains are still there. The Gulf of Mexico is still there. And I mean, it's just, some years we have some factors that come together that help prevent tornadoes, like drought situations, that sort of thing. So I'm always careful about that. What you mentioned on that, has Tornado Alley shifted? Because the last thing I ever want to do is to present some sort of argument that would suggest that, well, you really don't have to worry about those anymore.
A false sense of security.
That could not be further from the truth. We need to be just as on guard in 2019 as we were on 1999 when the May 3rd tornado came through. There's nothing that's dramatically shifted in our climate or anything like that would cause us to believe that there would be no risk of tornadoes in Oklahoma.
Okay, let's move on to spring 2019. It wouldn't take much to be more active than it was a year ago. Hard to believe, and you and I were talking before the interview, May 1st of last year was the first day of a tornado on the ground in Oklahoma. That's unheard of. But it looks like it's setting up with the warm Gulf moisture, and what they call an El Nino pattern is in effect. Do you see this being a kind of a bumpy spring, perhaps?
Yeah, one of the things I'll say about El Nino and La Nina, both of those impact our weather. That's the warming and cooling of the water that's in the Pacific Ocean near the equator, and so that results in some changes in our jet stream flow. So we're all connected on this planet. I mean, you go from really planetary scale type of jet stream and different flow around the globe, all the way down to the micro scale, like a tornado in Oklahoma, right? So it's hard to always make those connections, by the way, to go from something on such a big scale down to something that's such a little scale and say, oh, that caused that. So I'm always careful about El Nino and La Nina in terms of it being a direct impact. And the other thing is, sometimes we see a weak El Nino or something like that coming out of winter, and we end up with a quiet year. Then other years we end up with a very active year. So what we try to do is look at statistically and see what would be the most likely outcome if we did have an El Nino or La Nina. So it's one factor. There's a lot of other circulations, the atmosphere, and a lot of other things. I mean, I want to, you kind of get into that. Well, it's just too complicated to figure out. We don't ever go there. We want to try to figure things out, and that's what we devote ourselves to, in figuring out the science so that we can better predict them. But one of the other factors that really has our attention is the fact that we're not in a drought. So last year, if you remember, even in April, we had that huge wildfire in northwestern Oklahoma called the Ray Fire, and that was just indicative of the terrible drought that we were in. We don't have that this year. It has rained and rained and rained. So what that means is you're getting ready to see the grass green up here real quick, like in the next couple of weeks. You can already see the Bradford pears; they're budding right now. We're not going to have what that results in scientifically is when you don't have a drought, the dry line, which is a big initiating factor for our storms. Dry line just separates dry air to the west and warm, moist air to the east. That dry line is going to set up further west, like in western Oklahoma or the Texas Panhandle. And so what happens as a result is the storms form initially in either Texas or western Oklahoma, and then they move toward the I-35 corridor and they intensify, and that's when they start producing tornadoes. If you've got a drought situation, well, that dry line may set up on top of I-35, the storms form, and by the time they're actually doing their business and really serious, they're already east of I-35 into eastern Oklahoma. So you're always concerned about kind of what's happening upstream from where you are, because we all know that storms move. They move at 30 to 35 miles per hour most of the time in Oklahoma, sometimes a little faster, sometimes slower, but they generally move from west to east or southwest to northeast. So where they form is one of the biggest factors in whether we end up with an active year or not. And so that's in my mind, I think the drought situation is actually maybe even a bigger component than El Nino or La Nina.
Very, very interesting. So with your data that you guys at Channel 5 have looked at, and I know you didn't just start, are you looking at above average year perhaps for tornadoes in Oklahoma, and maybe will we see, unfortunately, more violent scale tornadoes this season?
Yeah, that's a tough prediction. It really is. And there's not really anything you can hang your hat on based on what is happening right now or what has happened over the winter or even last fall or anything like that. Typically, seasonal things that are happening right now are not real good predictors of what's to come. And so when people ask that you're right, it is $1 million question, Todd. That's what people want to know. They want to know, in our opinion, is this going to be worse? And I get that. I'm always careful to answer that question. I don't want to punt. I don't want to not give any indications, but I'm intentionally a little bit vague on it because I don't think that there's real strong correlations, like I was saying, to what's going on in this particular season to what's coming next. And here's the thing that I come back to. If there is one tornado in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's a bad year.
You're right.
And so we get into those kind of that semantics of, well, was this a good year or a bad year? Well, if a tornado hit someone and killed them, it's a bad year. That's my measuring stick. And so I don't get quite as caught up in the numbers, other than to say, like I think we were talking about earlier, as you do see an increasing number of tornadoes, you would also tend to think that the risk is higher just because you're dealing with more of them. So if I look at the last few years, our averages have been a little bit low average, especially last year. And typically, when we took a look at climatology, which just means what has happened in the past in our weather, and you really look at that, it would tend to lean toward, along with the data that you mentioned with El Nino and La Nina, the drought situation, all of that. There are some factors that would tend to make you think, as a meteorologist, that we would have a more active season, that there would be a higher number of tornadoes than average this spring. But there's There's no guarantee on that. Like I said, for every rule, there's an exception in meteorology, and I mean, that is very true right there.
You know, I've heard people say, Michael, well, man, there are already monsters down in the south. I mean, this thing's going to be bad. People don't understand that the tornado season actually starts in the south and then kind of gravitates to the northwest, back towards the Central Plains region. Is that not right?
Yeah, that's right. The southeast is more prone. Their tornado season, so to speak, actually can happen even in the winter time, January, February down in Florida, and those areas where the jet streams are real active, and yet they still have a lot of moisture and the low-level jet or winds just above the surface that are really strong out of the south. Those help create the atmosphere to spin, and then sometimes you can get tornadoes out of those. It does start in the southeast, especially in March, February, March, even April, and then we tend to see the tornadoes, the most of our tornadoes in April and May in Oklahoma. Some carry over into June some years. It's funny though, as we've kind of talked about it over the years, and I've talked with Rick Smith a lot. He's the National Weather Service. He's our warning coordination meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Norman. And he tweets out and puts on Facebook, and sometimes he says, well, really our tornado season is from January 1st to December 31st.
It's true. It's true.
You know, just to make the point, like we have had tornadoes in every single month. We've had deadly tornadoes in the fall. We've had deadly tornadoes in the spring. Like, you can have them anytime as long as the conditions are right. So, but I will say that we do look at the statistics, and statistically, April and May are going to be in June, those are going to be the times that you really watch out for. And even really, we kind of mark our calendar March 15th through June 15th. That's a time frame that I don't take vacation, for instance. So I mark that off my calendar. So usually spring break, I'm here. It's spring break this week, and here I am working. It's not storming outside, but I'm always prepared for that just in case. So, but you're right. Just because we have a big tornado outbreak in Alabama in March doesn't necessarily guarantee that there will be big tornadoes in Oklahoma. So we tend to see that fluctuation, though, as things start making the news and become a big deal, where you lose 23 lives like they lost in Alabama. Immediately people start thinking, oh, it's going to be a bad year in Oklahoma. It doesn't necessarily mean that, but at the same time, it's a good reminder, like, we got to be ready. We got to be ready, because tornadoes can happen here anytime, any month of the year.
Okay, moving on to something I know you're very, very passionate about, Michael, and that is severe weather precautions. My philosophy is, if you wait to put your plan together the day there's expected to be severe weather, you've waited too late. Isn't that correct?
That's right. That's exactly right. And for one thing, you just don't have time. You don't have time to get everything prepared. You don't have time to get your supplies ready. You don't have time to teach. Let's say you have somebody that maybe is wheelchair bound or something like that. You know, those type of situations that add time to your ability to be able to get into a safe place, those have to all be accounted for. And especially with children, and, you know, oh, well, you know, Fluffy is lost. I don't know where she went, you know, and you got to go find the cat or the dog or whatever. You know, all those sorts of intangibles, those all have to get taken care of, because if not, what happens is, you know how it is. If you leave something to chance, the chances are it'll go wrong. That's what leaving to chance, that's what it does. Now, it may work out, but you're taking a risk by not preparing. And so the best thing to do is to look, and everybody has to do this individually. There's a personal accountability that has to take place on this, where everybody has to assess their risk, what type of shelter they have, what options do they have available to them, and then how am I going to get the warning? So it's all about knowing the threat, staying informed, and then having a plan and executing that plan when that threat comes. And if you don't have those two components working well, then there is a risk involved. You mentioned it before. You asked me just a little bit ago. Was I surprised that there were not more fatalities in Oklahoma from May 3rd, 99? The answer is still yes, but we have worked hard to prepare people, and people, we live in Oklahoma. We understand that there's tornadoes and all that. Even with all that knowledge and all that experience, that is never going to actually protect you from a tornado. You must have a plan. You have to have practiced that plan. Your kids have to know exactly what they need to do and when they need to do it. And then you have to actually do it. I mean, you can't sit there and second guess. If you come under a tornado warning, you need to execute your tornado action plan and not sit there and think, well, the last few times it didn't happen, so we're just going to ignore this one. That's a bad idea.
Okay, we have a growing population in Oklahoma City, some that have never been through severe weather season in Oklahoma. What is your advice as far as safety precautions, what they should do in preparation and safety spots in case of an emergency?
Okay, so it does start with getting the information, and thankfully we're in an information age where it's gone the opposite way, where it's information overload. Here's what I would say. First of all, social media is excellent. It really is. You can get a lot of information quickly about something that's happening or something that's happened recently. What social media is not really that great at right now, in my opinion, is notifications live while something's going on. You have to really take some steps to be able to get notified. I would say, when it comes to that, that's not really your best first line of defense. That's a good supplement to being able to get additional information after you hear about a warning. Okay, then you can dive in further. And the beauty about social media is like Facebook Live, for instance, or something like that, or Periscope if it's on Twitter. These kind of live platforms are better than a post that's 3 hours old, obviously, right? That's not meant to be a warning platform, but we do have the capability of doing live, which is nice because people can ask questions and they can get a response, right then. A lot of times, not always, but a lot of times, depending on the workload of whoever's doing the Facebook Live. But TV is still so valuable because it's live, it's happening right then, and we present a comprehensive picture. So we have a lot of different people out in the field. We have, of course, our radar tools. We have so many tools at our disposal, and we can share all those from one place, and people can tune in and see what's going on right then. So I really stress that because everybody needs to have more than one way to get a warning. They really do. And I'm always really concerned at nighttime because people go into bed and storms don't quit just because the sun goes down. I mean, they don't. And they can be very, very intense at night. In some cases, the wind shear actually increases at night, which would actually, as long as if the cap increases and we can get the storms to just cut off and stop, that's good. But if the cap is weak and the wind shear increases, we can actually see bigger and stronger tornadoes at night than we even do during the day at times, which is scary to think about in some ways. But the point in that and saying all that is outdoor warning sirens were never designed with the intention of waking you up at night to alert you to the possibility of a tornado. That's not what they're for. They're to let people know who are out playing baseball or at a baseball game, oh, the tornado warning sirens are going on. It's time to go get to shelter, So that's what outdoor warning sirens are for. So it's very important to have a NOAA weather radio if you can. That's still a really good investment. It's been talked about for many years. What I would tell people is if you're going to invest in a weather radio, if you don't have one, I would recommend that you get one. But do your homework and find one that's programmable, because what can happen is you get a weather radio, but if you can't program it and it's going off every single watch or every single severe thunderstorm that rolls along in the springtime, you're going to lose a lot of sleep and you're just going to get mad and turn the thing off, pull the batteries out, and that'll be that. It will be useless to you. So make sure you get one that's programmable so you can say, well, I just really wanted to know if there's a tornado warning. And then the weather radio will only go off if the tornado warning is issued for your area. But really, with the with cell phones, with smartphones where they're at now, they have apps that do that very same thing. They function as a weather radio. So there's so much great technology now. So there are ways to get notified in multiple different ways. So I know I've spent a long time in that, but you're right. I'm passionate about this. So you do want to, this is an area where you need to prepare. You need to know, okay, this is a good system. I've got this way is going to get me the warning if it comes out, and I've got this way as a backup, and I'll go and give a plug for our KOCO5 app. It's awesome. So on the weather app, on the upper left, there's 3 little dashes, and it's where the settings are, and it says customize alerts. You can put in zip codes for, like, if you have kids, like if you have like a kid who's in college somewhere, maybe they're, I don't know, let's say up in Tulsa or something. You can actually put in a zip code for Tulsa, and your phone will go off if the tornado warnings issued for their zip code too. So you can pick like 3 more locations, and your app will use your GPS location in your phone, and you have like a mobile weather radio. Then it doesn't matter where you go. If you're out driving on the road, you're cross country. You don't know St. Louis, Missouri, like Oklahoma City, or something like that. Well, if your phone is in the tornado warning, it's going to go off, and then you need to find somewhere to get to shelter. So that's a great tool. Next thing's having the plan. So that's number one, is being able to get the info. Then the second part is really executing your plan. And again, that, like I mentioned, that's going to vary a lot depending on what your individual situation is. For someone who lives in an apartment, who lives upstairs, who doesn't have some place to get down to the lowest level or get underground, that's a different scenario than someone else who's got a tornado shelter in their garage.
Great advice. I've got 2 more questions for you. Let's talk about educating kids, because severe weather, even just a common thunderstorm, sometimes will cause a lot of anxiety with young people. That has to be, I think, part of your preparation plan at helping them to understand the dangers, and that not all thunderstorms and storms are deadly.
Right. That's right. It is important and I'm sensitive to people who do have the anxiety part of it. And the way I really look at that is information's your greatest tool. If that's something that if you're coming into Oklahoma and it's your first time here in this state and all you've heard about is how terrible things are, there are so many Oklahomans I've talked to, and they've never even seen a tornado. I'm like, what are y'all talking about? But information is your best asset, because that's when we go in the dark. Here's a good, for instance. I love to fish. Bear with me here. I'm going to just give me a little bit of leeway here for a second, if you would.
You got all the time you want.
Well, good. As a kid, I went out and fished farm ponds all the time, out in K County, Osage County, up in Ponca City, and areas out in the Osage and everything. And, we would be walking through the grass, and you'd see the grass start to move, and you're going, you can't see, but you can tell by the way the grass was moving that it was a snake. And so we have water moccasins. Oh, they happen to be poisonous. So I was very aware of that growing up and walking through tall grass, sometimes around these ponds that weren't mowed, but the fishing was just too good, man. Always the best spots, it seemed like, were the ones where you had to take the biggest risk too, because nobody else wanted to go there and fish. But we didn't have a problem until I couldn't see you, Mr. Snake, and then now we got a problem. So I think about that in terms of information with respect to severe weather. So I'm going to carry that analogy over. If I can see as a storm chaser where the tornado's at, then I'm okay. If it goes rain wrapped on me, or if it's at night, sure, I've got radar, I've got some other tools and things like that. I'm watching the wind direction. I'm watching a lot of different things that are going on. But the less information I have, the more my anxiety level tends to go up. So the best way to combat that anxiety is to say, man, I need to know everything there is to know about safety, and really tailor my severe weather plan to whatever scenario that I've got going on. What that means is, it's not just about whether you're at home in an apartment or in a manufactured home or in a single family home, wherever you're at. It may be that It may be that you got to go shopping, and you're in a big shopping, like you're at the grocery store and it's a big free span roof. Those are inherently dangerous. You don't ever want to be out in the middle of the store. So what do you have to know? You got to know to get to the bathroom in the front or the back of the store, or for instance, I guess like a Walmart or something. You'd be back in the layaway area. You'd get into the smallest room you can. Everywhere you go, you're going to at least spend a little bit of time thinking through and talking through with your family. If this scenario happens, this is what we're going to do. And if you do that and you plan ahead, all of a sudden, it's not scramble mode. It's not panic mode. It's not that time at the end of the game where you see a team that doesn't have a play drawn up and they just scramble around and finally somebody throws up a prayer or whatever and it doesn't go in and you lose. That's not what you want during severe weather. So don't do that, and actually spend some time, get on the internet, research it, go to National Weather Service tornado precautions. You can Google, just about anything now. There's so much information out there. There's really no reason for anybody to not be informed and not know what's going on, other than just, if you just don't do it, whether you're complacent, you think it's not going to happen to you, or whether, if it's laziness, whatever it is. We don't want to approach a risk, a well-known risk that has happened for years and years and years in Oklahoma. There's no reason for any of us to be unprepared.
To me, Michael, safety begins with knowledge. And I know that people have anxiety, and sometimes they don't know the difference between a tornado watch or a severe thunderstorm watch and a warning. Explain those differences for maybe people that haven't really been through a lot of weather.
Okay, that's a good one, because we do still have people that get confused on that, and it's still the best system, I think, that we've come up with over the years, and that's not just me, that's a lot of people. But a watch is really, if you look at the weather map, for instance, even up in the corner of the TV, or you hear us talk about a watch, what you'll see is a pretty large area that gets issued for a watch. And so that just means the conditions are favorable for the possibility of severe weather or the possibility of tornadoes to develop. There hasn't been one necessarily spotted yet. It's really meant to be a heads up. A few hours before storms form and really get going. It might be an hour before. It might be 30 minutes before. It could be as much as 3 or 4 hours early. And again, it kind of depends on where you're at in that watch. If you're in a different part of the watch, then it may take longer for the storms to get to you if they're moving slow or something like that. But they're really meant to be a heads up. So a watch, if you'll remember this, a watch is just kind of watch out. Conditions are favorable. When we move into a warning, that's where things get more serious. So to me, the word warning actually does convey that, just the word itself. This is a warning. Okay, well, what do I need to be warned about? Well, this severe thunderstorm has the possibility of producing 80-mile-per-hour winds. Well, that's pretty significant. That could do some serious structural damage. I don't want to be near a window, a west-facing window. If the storm's coming in from the west, it could blow, debris in through my window and, hurt me. That type of thinking will always help, I think, when it comes to the watch, warning, and trying to figure out which one's which. So the warnings are much more specific. They're much more time sensitive in the sense that when a warning gets issued, you should expect severe weather very, very close to you, if not, on you, like in your house or whatever. It's going to be a close call if you have a warning, and it may be more than a close call. It may actually hit you. So the warning is certainly the upgrade from the watch.
All right. In closing, tell us again how you can get the KOCO weather app.
The best way to do, just type in KOCO 5 News in the Play Store or wherever it is, the Apple Store, whatever it is, whatever device you type, whatever type of device you have, and you'll be able to find it. And really, we used to have multiple different apps, and I think there were some people that were frustrated about that, how we used to have a KOCO5 tornado app, and we had a KOCO5 app, and they really found that we were spinning our wheels trying to do too many things, that the app was really, we could put it into one app and have everybody kind of go to the same place and get that information. So that's what we've done. So it's just the KOCO5 News app. That's the best. That's one of the best tools you can have, because again, we stream our coverage live right there in your app on your phone. So if you're not near a TV, you can get the information right there on your phone, and just like you're at home watching us on TV. And I don't know if people know that or not, but that's an option. So, like I said, there's ways to get warnings based on your GPS location on your phone, and then you can put in other locations if you got friends and family in other parts of the state, or even anywhere in the country for that matter. As long as they get National Weather Service warnings, then you would get those right there on your phone. So there's a lot of great tools on that. And again, that just goes to point number one of knowing your risk and staying informed. And then, then number two is, again, having the plan and putting that plan into action.
Great stuff from KOCO Channel 5 meteorologist Michael Armstrong. Man, we've covered a lot. It was a blast today, and I hope that this will be beneficial to our listeners as well. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, I hope so too as well, Todd. And if anybody wants to, if they have questions about anything that we covered or anything like that, reach out to me. You can find my email at KOCO.com. You can actually reach out to me. I'm all over. I feel like I've got everything. I think the only thing I haven't done is Snapchat yet. So you're not going to get me on Snapchat.
You're smart.
I've drawn the line on that one. So far. I may have to get it at some point, but I haven't had to yet. But anyway, if anybody does have a question, listen, don't go without information. If you have a question, I really look at it that way. There really are no dumb questions. I'm never going to judge anyone. I would much rather you reach out to me and ask me the question and let me have a chance to answer it for you than for you to go into severe weather unprepared. So that'd be my plea to everyone on that.
Okay, I want to ride in Storm Command. Can I do that?
No, I don't think so. I'll have to ask. Well, I haven't been able to take any passengers yet. Maybe you can pull some sort of VIP card, Todd. I don't know.
I don't think so. Hey, good to talk to you, Michael. Thanks again for coming on.
Okay, thank you so much for your time.
Michael Armstrong of Channel 5 visiting with us here on this bonus crossover podcast from the Vible and VIBELAND Sports. We'll be back to wrap it up in just a moment.
Hi, we are VIBELAND. We are a creative network fostering and cultivating growth amongst a community of artists and innovators.
Here at HQ, we inspire young entrepreneurs to pursue their ideas and fulfill their highest ambitions. From producing albums to shooting multimedia content to our involvement with various charitable organizations within our local community, we seek to empower and spread knowledge through open source innovation.
We here at VIBELAND look forward to the future and hope you will join us on this exciting journey. Create, innovate, educate. VIBELAND.
And again, a big thank you to Channel 5 meteorologist Michael Armstrong for his visit today. Lots of good information on this podcast. We hope that you will take it to heart as you prepare for the upcoming spring storm season. Until next time, for everyone here at VIBELAND Media, I'm Todd Miller.
Hey, I'm on the way.